As the choir soft hymns filled the church, every eye turned to the back, drawn by the striking figure standing at the entrance. Nancy was dressed in a flowing black gown, her eyes red and swollen as if she hadn't slept in days. Her face was etched with pain and betrayal, her hands trembling as she clenched them at her sides. The air grew tense, thick with whispers, as Nancy took a deep breath and stormed down the aisle, her heels echoing loudly against the marble floor. "Never, Jason. Never," she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "After all I did for you, after everything I went through, is this how you choose to repay me?" The congregation fell silent, jaws dropping as they tried to process the spectacle unfolding before them. They exchanged glances, murmuring, "Who is she? And what's going on?" Some began to lean forward, eager to catch every word of the drama. Jason's face went pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he tried to steady himself. The tension in the room was unbearable. Zara, his beautiful bride, who had been blissfully unaware just moments ago, turned to him, her voice laced with shock and confusion. "Jason, what is this?" she demanded, her eyes piercing into him. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The entire church seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an explanation. But before he could utter a single word, Zara's family, led by her father, Chief Ikemba, rose from their seats in silent fury. Without a backward glance, Zara stormed out, her veil swaying behind her, her face hidden from view but her hurt unmistakable. Chief Ikemba, towering and fierce, marched down the aisle, stopping only inches from Jason. His voice was low but threatening, the words laced with a promise of retribution. "You will regret this, Jason. You will regret ever disgracing me and my daughter. I will ruin your life," he hissed before following his daughter and family out of the church. The congregation was in chaos, people standing and whispering, casting accusing glances at Jason, who stood frozen in shock. All he could hear was Nancy's sobs and the echo of Chief Ikemba's ominous words. Months before this moment, Jason had been fresh out of his NYSC program in Kebbi, ready to chase his dreams in Abuja. He dialed Nancy's number as he boarded the bus, his voice full of excitement. "Nancy, you are my lifesaver. I'm finally heading to Abuja. I pray I make it big soon because I can't wait to make you my queen. You deserve everything good in life, and I love you so much." On the other end, Nancy's cheeks flushed with joy, her heart swelling with love. She had loved Jason since their university days, had stood by him through thick and thin. Jason was an orphan, raised by his grandmother, who had passed away 2 years ago. Now he was truly alone, except for Nancy, who was his constant support and his family in every way that mattered. Nancy's family knew Jason well. They had always been like a pair. She had even turned down countless marriage proposals, her heart set solely on Jason. Her family, well-off and supportive, had helped her through her youth service in Lagos, where her brother Mr. Grayson worked. Nancy's world was stable, her needs met, and her love for Jason unwavering. But Jason's dreams led him to Abuja. He had an old friend named Evans there, who seemed to be living the high life. Evans had promised to help him land a good job, the kind that would finally allow Jason to be the provider Nancy deserved. When Jason shared his plans with Nancy, she was cautious but supportive. "You know your friend better than I do, Jason," she said softly. "If you believe in him, I'll believe in you. I'll support you." Jason had been endlessly grateful, showering Nancy with words of love and promises of a beautiful future together. But somewhere along the way, his hopes and dreams in Abuja took a dark turn. Weeks after Jason arrived in Abuja, his life took an unexpected turn. Evans, the friend who had promised to help him find a job, seemed to have other priorities. Instead of arranging interviews or setting up meetings, Evans swept Jason into a whirlwind of nightlife, lavish clubs, high-end parties, and exclusive events. The luxury and excitement dazzled Jason, but beneath the allure, he felt a growing unease. Days passed, then weeks, and still, Evans hadn't mentioned any job prospects point one night. After yet another evening of endless drinks and flashing lights, Jason sat in his small rented apartment, his mind clouded with doubts. He picked up his phone and dialed Nancy's number, her voice instantly soothing him. But tonight, her tone held a hint of worry. "Jason, I don't understand what's going on over there," Nancy said, her voice firm. "You went to Abuja to build a future for us, to make something of yourself. Has Evans even tried to help you find a job?" Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not yet, but he keeps telling me to be patient. He says these things take time." Nancy's patience was wearing thin. "Do you think he's serious about helping you, Jason? You can't just live off him, even if he's not complaining about it. You're a man, and you need to make your own way." Her words hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the promises he'd made and the love they shared. Jason tried to defend Evans, but he knew Nancy had a point. Evans's lifestyle was carefree, indulgent, and seductive, but it was not a future. "I know, Nancy. You're right. I'll talk to him tomorrow. I'll demand some clarity." He tried to reassure her, but deep down, he felt the sinking feeling of disappointment that ate as he ended the call. Jason lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the contrast between the life he'd imagined and the reality he was living. He wondered if Evans ever intended to help him, or if he was merely a distraction, pulling him further from the path he had set for himself and Nancy. The next day, Jason tried to confront Evans, but his friend brushed it off with a laugh. "Come on, Jason. Don't stress so much. You're in Abuja. Live a little. Jobs will come when they come." But Jason was no longer willing to accept excuses. He knew his love for Nancy was too precious to risk for fleeting pleasures. He had to make a choice: stay under Evans's unreliable promises, or step out alone and prove himself worthy of the love and faith Nancy had shown him. The decision weighed heavily on him as he realized that the real challenge in Abuja wasn't just finding a job. It was finding his own strength independent of others. Determined to stand on his own, Jason woke up early the next morning with renewed resolve. He dressed in his only decent suit, a hand-me-down from his late grandmother that was slightly worn but still neat, and headed out, clutching a folder of neatly printed resumes. As he left, he texted Nancy, "Starting fresh today. I'll make you proud." The day began with high hopes as he made his way to several companies Evans had casually mentioned in their conversations. The bustling streets of Abuja were filled with people who seemed to have purpose, each one hurrying to their destination. Jason, however, felt a pang of doubt as he entered one office building after another, his confidence wavering as he received rejection after rejection to AT his first stop, a financial services firm. The receptionist greeted him with a polite but dismissive smile. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No, but I was hoping to drop off my resume and perhaps meet with someone in HR," Jason replied. His voice steady but hopeful, the receptionist barely glanced at his resume. "I'm sorry, but we only take online applications, and we're not currently hiring." Her tone was final, and her eyes had already shifted to the next person in line. Jason walked out, a little less hopeful, but still determined. He repeated this routine at several other firms, his feet aching from the day's efforts. At some places, he was told the same thing: no hiring without an appointment or referral. Others simply wouldn't even take his resume. Undeterred, Jason spent the next few days scouring online job boards and classified ads, applying for anything that seemed remotely related to his skills. He took note of job fairs and open recruitment days, preparing for each one meticulously. The night before an open interview event at a local tech company, he stayed up late, studying the company's history and memorizing answers to common interview questions. The following morning, he joined a line of hopefuls waiting outside the tech company's office. Hours passed as one by one, applicants entered and left. When his turn came, Jason stepped in, greeted the interviewer, and confidently answered the questions. His voice trembled only slightly as he described his passion for learning and his dedication to whatever role he took on. The interviewer nodded, but her expression remained impassive. When she finally spoke, her words were polite yet firm. "Thank you, Mr. Jason. We'll be in touch if we have a position that matches your qualifications." Walking out, Jason's shoulders drooped slightly. He had done his best, but he knew what her words really meant: another polite rejection. Days turned into weeks, and Jason's funds started to dwindle. He had been staying in a cheap rented room, surviving on instant noodles and bread, cutting back on everything to make his money last. The nightlife and luxuries Evans offered felt like a distant memory, and he hadn't seen much of his friend lately. Evans had drifted, growing tired of Jason's job search obsession and avoiding conversations that hinted at his unfulfilled promises. Jason's morale dipped. Some nights, he lay awake wondering if he had made a mistake leaving the stability of his NYC stipend. But each time he felt himself falter, he thought of Nancy, her belief in him, her gentle yet firm words urging him to take control of his life. He couldn't let her down. One morning, exhausted but resolute, Jason decided to try a different approach. He'd heard about a small business district on the outskirts of Abuja where startups were known to take chances on new talent. They couldn't always pay well, but they offered valuable experience and sometimes even housing for interns and new hires. Gathering his last bit of energy, he traveled there, knocking on doors, introducing himself, and offering his services, even if just as a volunteer or intern. It was there, in a cramped office filled with buzzing computers and stacks of paperwork, that he found a glimmer of hope. A small logistics startup, struggling to keep up with its growing demands, welcomed him in. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Adebola, was kind but blunt. "We don't have the funds to pay you properly, but we need all the help we can get. If you're willing to learn and can handle the workload, we'll give you a small stipend and free housing." Jason accepted immediately, grateful for any opportunity. His tasks were far from glamorous: organizing files, managing delivery schedules, assisting with customer complaints. But he threw himself into every job with determination, learning the intricacies of logistics, handling customer relations, and even picking up new computer skills. Over time, Jason's hard work paid off. Mrs. Adebola noticed his dedication and began entrusting him with more responsibilities, allowing him to lead small projects and interact with clients. Though the pay was minimal, his skills and confidence grew each day, and he felt proud to send updates to Nancy, sharing each small victory with her. Months later, a major breakthrough came. A larger logistics company reached out to Mrs. Adebola's startup with a proposal for a merger. During one of the meetings, Jason presented his work, showcasing his contributions to improving the company's efficiency. Impressed by his knowledge and professionalism, the larger company's representatives offered him a full-time position as a junior operations manager with a decent salary. It was the moment he'd been working toward, and he knew it would finally allow him to fulfill his promises to Nancy and begin building the life they had dreamed of together. Jason's journey in Abuja was filled with hardship, but it had taught him resilience, independence, and the value of hard-earned success. Looking back, he realized he'd found a purpose far stronger than anything Evans could have offered. When he called Nancy that night, his voice was steady and full of pride. "I did it, Nancy. I finally did it on my own." For months into his new role as a junior operations manager, Jason finally felt as though he was standing on solid ground. The paycheck, though modest, was steady, and he had a routine he could rely on. Every morning, he'd wake up early, grab a quick breakfast, and head to the office, determined to give his best. Nancy's voice echoed in his mind, encouraging him, "I'm proud of you, Jason. You're finally building the life we talked about." Her words were a constant source of motivation, pushing him to work harder. He had just started making small savings, planning to surprise Nancy with a visit at the end of the year. But beneath this newfound stability, Jason was unaware that a storm was brewing. One chilly Monday morning, Jason arrived at the office to an unusual silence. The usual bustling energy seemed muted. People were whispering, heads close together, casting glances toward the manager's office. Jason made his way to his desk, sensing something was wrong. Just as he sat down, his supervisor, Mr. Musa, approached him, his face stern and serious. "Jason, we need to talk," Mr. Musa said, motioning for him to follow. Jason's heart raced as he followed his boss into a small conference room. Seated inside were the company's HR manager and Mrs. Adebola, the woman who had given him a chance in the startup world. Her face was drawn, her usually warm expression replaced with a look of worry. Jason's stomach churned. "Jason," began Mr. Musa, clearing his throat. "I'll get straight to the point. The board has made some difficult decisions, and unfortunately, your position is being terminated effective immediately." Jason blinked, the words not fully registering. "Terminated?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "But why? I thought everything was going well. I've been working hard, I haven't missed any deadlines, and I've even taken on extra projects." The HR manager leaned forward, her face sympathetic but businesslike. "Jason, it's not a matter of performance. This is strictly a cost-cutting measure. The company has been struggling financially since the merger, and we've been forced to downsize across departments. Your role was one of the most recently added positions, and unfortunately, it was marked for redundancy." Jason felt like the ground had slipped from beneath him. He had worked tirelessly, given his all, and now, just as he had begun to feel secure, everything was crumbling. He looked over at Mrs. Adebola, hoping for support, but her expression remained pained and apologetic. "I fought for you, Jason," she said softly, as though reading his thoughts. "I really did. But there's nothing more I can do. My own position is on shaky ground." Jason's head spun as he tried to process the reality of his situation. "But I just started saving. I was going to." His voice trailed off as he realized how helpless he sounded. The HR manager gently interrupted his thoughts. "We're offering a small severance package to help you transition, but we can't extend any further assistance." "I'm so sorry, Jason." He sat in silence, numb, watching as the meeting concluded. They handed him an envelope with his severance details, and he forced himself to stand, shaking hands with them one last time before exiting the room. Back at his desk, Jason sat in disbelief, staring at the empty envelope in his hands. He watched as a few colleagues walked past, giving him sympathetic glances, but no one stopped to offer words of comfort. The buzz of the office felt louder, harsher, and suddenly, the place he had called his workplace felt cold and unwelcoming. As he gathered his belongings, flashes of his memories here filled his mind. Long nights working late, the first project he led, the pride he'd felt when he finally got his ID badge. Now each memory felt hollow, and each item he packed reminded him of the life he was about to leave behind. Jason walked out of the office building for the last time, carrying a small box with his few possessions. The streets of Abuja, usually alive with possibilities, felt oppressive. He couldn't bear to call Nancy not yet. How could he tell her that, just as things were beginning to look up, he was back to square one? That night, Jason sat in his dimly lit room, staring at his phone. He knew he had to call Nancy. He had to tell her the truth. Gathering his courage, he dialed her number, and as her familiar voice answered with joy, his composure crumbled. "Nancy, I lost the job," he confessed, his voice thick with shame. "They said it was budget cuts. I tried my best, but there was a pause on the other end. But when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, steady, and full of empathy. Jason, I know you did your best. This isn't the end, okay? I believe in you, and I know you'll find a way through this." Her words wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and in that moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Though he was devastated and uncertain about his future, Nancy's unwavering faith in him reminded him that he wasn't alone. The next morning, without a word to Jason, Nancy was on the first flight from Lagos to Abuja. She had packed a small suitcase with thoughtful gifts for him: new shoes, a few t-shirts, trousers, and jeans. It was her way of showing him love, a habit she had carried on from their university days, when she'd always bring something special for him after every visit. This time, she knew he needed that extra love more than ever. As she landed in Abuja, Nancy felt a rush of excitement mixed with a deep sense of urgency. She knew how much Jason would be hurting, and she couldn't stand the thought of him going through it alone. A quick cab ride brought her to the quiet neighborhood where Jason's apartment was nestled. It was a modest, rundown building, but to her, it was a sacred place filled with their shared dreams and memories. When she finally reached his door, Nancy took a deep breath, holding her small suitcase in one hand and the bag of gifts in the other. She knocked softly at first, then a bit louder, her heart racing as she imagined the look on his face when he saw her. Inside, Jason was sitting on his worn-out couch, still reeling from the events of the past few days. His mind was heavy, clouded with doubts, and he felt adrift, unsure of his next step. The sudden knock startled him, pulling him out of his thoughts. He walked slowly to the door, not expecting anyone, let alone Nancy. When he opened it, he froze. There she was, standing before him with a warm, radiant smile, her eyes full of love and understanding. For a moment, Jason thought he might be dreaming. "Nancy," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Nancy's smile widened, and she held her arms open. "Surprise," she said softly, and in an instant Jason was wrapped in her embrace, hugging her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. He could feel the weight of his worries melting away, replaced by the warmth of her presence. It was as if life had come rushing back to him, filling him with a joy he hadn't felt in months. "Oh, Nancy," he murmured, burying his face in her shoulder. "You have no idea how much this means to me." She pulled back slightly, her hands resting on his shoulders as she looked him in the eye. "I know, Jason. I came because I wanted you to know that you're not alone in this. We'll get through this together." She held up the bag of gifts with a playful smile. "And I couldn't show up empty-handed, could I?" They laughed as Jason pulled her inside, already feeling lighter. He eagerly unpacked the clothes she brought, his face lighting up with gratitude and excitement at each item. "Nancy, you didn't have to do all this, but thank you. It's more than I deserve." "You deserve everything, Jason," she replied, squeezing his hand. "And we'll make this weekend special." Over the next 2 days, Jason and Nancy shared a whirlwind of simple joys. That Saturday morning, they went grocery shopping at a local market, filling their baskets with ingredients to make a few of their favorite dishes. They laughed as they navigated the crowded aisles, swapping stories about their childhoods and planning their weekend meals. Back at his apartment, they cooked together, filling the small space with the delicious aroma of freshly prepared meals. They playfully argued over the right way to make jollof rice, laughing and stealing bites as they went. For Jason, it felt like a return to simpler, happier times, when his only worries were what they would cook for dinner and which movie they would watch that night. That evening, after dinner, they snuggled up on his worn couch, blankets piled high as they turned on Netflix. Nancy had picked out a couple of feel-good comedies, hoping to lift Jason's spirits. As the hours passed, they laughed together, pausing every so often to share memories, talk about their future, and reassure each other that brighter days were ahead.